Good afternoon, and welcome to our conversation today with Mike Schabel, the VP of Small Cells at Alcatel-Lucent. And this conversation is part of our report on LTE unlicensed and its coexistence with Wi-Fi. Mike, thanks for taking the time to talk to us today.
Thanks for having me, Monica.
So, Mike, can you tell us what is it you do at Alcatel-Lucent on small cells?
Yeah, so actually, I'm fortunate enough to run the business at Alcatel-Lucent. So, focusing on the over 70 operators that we do business with around the world in 53 countries, trying to take anything from a femto to an enterprise to an outdoor metro cell product and get those commercially deployed. So, 53 countries means I'm on a lot of airplanes.
A lot of airplanes and a lot of technologies. And the list of technologies keeps growing by the day. Instead of getting smaller, it gets expanded. And this is what's happening with LTE unlicensed, right? We thought that we had Wi-Fi, we had LTE, and we just had to put the two together. And now, yeah, there is another third one. So, yeah. And it's a little bit of like Wi-Fi, a little bit like LTE, and what do we do with it? So, can you tell us how does LTE unlicensed fit in this ecosystem of wireless technologies?
Well, I think it's important. It's a great question because it can get very confusing when we're talking about all these different technologies. I often, to simplify it for myself, I often think about what's the problem we're trying to solve. And so I think you have to look no further than some of the recent spectrum auctions to recognize that spectrum that we transmit wireless cellular signals over is and offer an incredible quality of experience over is going to be more challenged in a variety of ways. First of all, when you have more users doing more things on it, then your capacity limited, and so people want to continue growing their ability to send more traffic. So you need more network. Well, when you try to go after more network, now we need more spectrum. That spectrum is limited. It's becoming more rare every time we consume it, and therefore operators have said, well, why don't we go use some of the unlicensed spectrum to complement what we do with our licensed spectrum? Because they can already do some pretty cool things, dual connectivity. They can do carrier aggregation. And so why not aggregate in some of that unlicensed traffic and unlicensed spectrum? Well, there's only a small issue. And the small issue is that there are other things going on that use unlicensed spectrum. Wi-Fi is a great example, but not the only one. In fact, actually, there are other technologies, sometimes in white space, as an example, where you have other technologies that run and use some of that unlicensed spectrum. And so the real challenge here is, if you're going to go use that unlicensed spectrum, how do you do it in a way that's, number one, fair, number two, standardized in a way that everybody can go use it, and three, doesn't really change the nature or the behavior of the other technologies that are already there. And so it requires a tremendous amount of collaboration and careful study to get that done and done properly.
Yeah, and this is a concern that some of the people have with LTE unlicensed, is that it's seen as a sort of a newcomer intruding in a territory that is already being used, even though obviously it's an unlicensed band for everybody to use. And so there is a question of fairness. How do you define fairness?
Well, I mean, unlicensed spectrum is unlicensed spectrum. I mean, anybody is effectively allowed to use it for certain purposes. And so, fair is probably not a term I need to go and try to define. But what I can say is it's important to accommodate the other technologies that are already there and existing and working in a particular way, whether it's a specific regulation or standard for which they're working that they'll agree to, or even behaviorally, how they've agreed to work with each other to use that space. I believe that you shouldn't go confuse that or mess that up. I mean, you should accommodate it, you should recognize it, you should appreciate it, and work collaboratively with those other users in order to become yet an additional user in their space. So they've cornered it off. They've carved off their space, and you know what? You have to respect that. And I think that's what lies ahead in the challenge for LTEU is to properly accommodate, whether it's Wi-Fi, whether it's white space, whether it's any of these others. You have to accommodate what's there and do it in a collaborative way.
Yeah, but at the same time, you can also make the argument that by using LTE license, you use the spectrum more efficiently because it's often not used not used to this maximum potential. So, do you think that with LTE license, you get a better utilization of the spectrum assets that are available, or what's going to change there?
Well, yeah, I think there's no question, not that I've heard, of whether or not LTE as a technology is valid as a highly spectrally efficient solution. Whenever you have your own slice of spectrum, you can do some really cool things within that and get some very high performance gains. And you compare that to what Wi-Fi does, and Wi-Fi says you don't have your own slice, and therefore you have to spend more time in a non-scheduled environment. Right. So because you have so many different players, and when you have so many players, you can't guarantee what anybody else will do. You effectively have to listen before somebody else engages. And I think what has been really clever in the LTEU technologies is to say, how can I take the coding efficiencies and the spectrum efficiencies and blend that into the concept of being a good partner and a good player in the use of that spectrum by listening to everybody and then speaking when it's an appropriate time to do so. And I'm using voice analogies here, speaking, but it's the same type of concept. You have a conversation, let's not ruin it.
Yeah, and I think that's something that it's important for everybody involved, mobile operators, enterprise, residential users, and everybody.
Yeah.
But from a mobile operator point of view, one question that in fact, that's the first question I had is like, when we have Wi-Fi, and Wi-Fi is in all phones, it's available everywhere, it's relatively inexpensive. Why do we need another technology? From an mobile operator point of view, what is the big gain from LTE unlicensed?
Yeah. I mean, we're thinking about LTEU as a different technology. It's not. It's cellular. It is LTE. It is LTE running over a different piece of spectrum. But guess what we do today? I mean, if I look in any operator's LTE network today, generally speaking, they're operating over, many different pieces of spectrum, down and up, as well as, by region, multiple pieces of spectrum that they're putting together and in fact aggregating together so it looks unified. This unlicensed piece has everybody in this weird form because they're calling it something new. It's not new. It's LTE carrier agged over a piece of spectrum that we carve out. The only issue is that can you carve it out? And so you take one small step, technically, to figure out when you can carve it out when it's not being used, and so then consume it when it's not being used, or if everybody's using it in a way that respects what other people are doing. So it's not new. And it's not a different technology. It's the same technology, just applied in another piece of spectrum that's also being used elsewhere. Mm-hmm. Now, the key thing, though, is why. And I come back to why. What's the value of doing it? Well, an operator who has access to more spectrum can deliver a higher capacity network. And I think it's as a consumer, so I was trying to always relate it back to me. As a consumer, why would I care? Well, number one, if my operator is spending all of their capital on buying more spectrum to give me what I want as a user experience, ultimately that's going to come back to me. I've got to help them pay for that. So if there is available spectrum with which they can go and deliver the type of increasing experience that I want, and in fact, actually, as we look even further to diversify the number of things that I send over a wireless signal, whether it's my device or whether it's my laptop or whether it's Internet of Things over a cellular network, for example, in a connected city, those are things I want them to go leverage, because when they can lower their cost perspective, that doesn't come back to me. I mean, I can lower my cost perspective and get of how I'm helping them pay for all of this.
Yeah, yeah, and at the same time, it's not the Wi-Fi versus LTE unlicensed,
No.
and I think that this is an important aspect that sometimes gets forgotten. And operators will not only use both technologies in different places, but they might also use it in the same place. So in the same location, they use LTE licensed, unlicensed, and Wi-Fi. And how do you see from a mobile operator that this will play out?
Yeah, well, Wi-Fi is really interesting from a cellular operator perspective because um, uh, it has mobility capabilities, but it was really to serve nomadic, data usage, and so it's really well tuned for that. Some operators have decided to roll out an extension of their wireline network to provide a wireless solution. I've seen cable operators do that. I've seen a lot of wireline ISPs do that. So we see a lot of that wireline or wireless service to provide that last, X meter access and mobility relative to that tether. That's going to continue. And it gets a little confusing when you see service providers that actually have both, that they have a carrier grade Wi-Fi solution and a cellular solution, and they have both and they offer both. What I find is that they'll try to use that by load balancing across the two networks. So they say, I'm going to put you on Wi-Fi or cellular. It's an either or technology. And that was a really cool thing about Hotspot 2.0 and ANDSF, was to enable that type of switching capability. LTEU is absolutely, fits right into that paradigm. It's not changing that paradigm. But I don't think I don't know that it fundamentally enhances Wi-Fi or LTEU. It's just making LTEU available to more spectrum. It's really as simple as that.
Yeah, but your solution is also it's interesting, because what you're trying to do is to actually increase the integration between the two, and by doing that you can have a better utilization of all the resources that are available. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about what is that you're trying to do at Alcatel-Lucent.
Right. Yeah. So we have something that is, if we park LTEU for a minute, great technology, but let's park it for a minute. We're introducing something that is very different in that we think Wi-Fi is a great technology. Wi-Fi in of itself is a fantastic solution. What we realize, though, is that, and by the way, it's in our homes, it's in our enterprise. It's going to be a very important part of the Internet of Things as that moves forward in the wireless home and the wireless enterprise. There's no question about that. What we recognize, though, is that as you put more demands on that, as you try on that network, you're going to expose some of the challenges that network has. So it has a lot of spectrum, so you can send a lot of capacity down it. But what we also saw is that the uplink is kind of challenged, and that network then can be better served when I can start overcoming some of its inherent issues by using some cellular solutions. So what we come up with is a technology we call wireless unified networks, where we're saying it's not Wi-Fi or cellular, like we said earlier, but it's Wi-Fi and cellular operating at the same time, using their inherent strengths to deliver a unified experience to our users. What's the value? So who cares, right? So here's yet another technology. It's going to drive everybody crazy, right? The value is now we can build a unified wireless network instead of Wi-Fi or cellular. And it's an extremely high performance network. So with one of my partners, Qualcomm, we were showing an instantiation of this, where by taking the cellular and putting it together with the Wi-Fi, we were providing download speeds, demonstrating it at Mobile World Congress at 450 megabit per second down over wireless, using standard off-the-shelf stuff that exists today. Now, 450 down on wireless is pretty interesting. Mm-hmm. We have 700 going in the labs, and we have a pathway to a gig down. So what we realize is that instead of hitting those types of rates with the technology, the standalone technologies, is going to get harder over time. But we just realized if we put the two together, as simple as that, is put them together, now all of a sudden you can get some extremely great horsepower out of it. So it changes our thinking. about what wireless networks actually should be on a go-forward basis.
Yeah, well, and I guess it's not just putting them together; it's putting them together to take them to leverage the relative advantages of them. So it's not just A plus B, and so this is the first step to sort of get Wi-Fi and cellular together.
Mm-hmm.
And so how does LTE and license come in that picture?
Well, remember when I said what we're doing is we're blending Wi-Fi and cellular. I can do it with standard cellular today and standard Wi-Fi today. We blend those and we end up with a very high performance network. So that way, for example, if I were trying to do Wi-Fi video uplink, that actually can put a lot of load on the wireless network. When I blend them on the Wi-Fi network, when I blend those two technologies, actually, I can more easily handle synchronous traffic and a lot of that synchronous uplink-like traffic. And it doesn't congest the Wi-Fi network as much as it otherwise would. And so we can handle a lot. Now, what about LTEU and how does LTEU come? Remember, these are completely separate technologies. One is just more LTEU spectrum. This one is about blending technologies to get a better overall user experience. Now, we can actually take LTEU as the cellular piece. Because remember, I'm just taking Wi-Fi and cellular and I'm putting them together. I can also take Wi-Fi and LTEU and put them together. It's exactly the same. So these are coexisting concepts, not competitive concepts in any way.
Mm-hmm. So from a mobile operator point of view, when they have to manage traffic, they can decide where, the uplink, downlink for the data plane, on which interfaces it goes, and also for the control plane. Is it the control plane all in cellular, or how does that work?
Yeah, so it really, our first example of this is what we call Wi-Fi boost, because really we're just boosting the performance of Wi-Fi. I take the Wi-Fi downlink exactly as it is, no change. It's Wi-Fi as Wi-Fi. And what we said is instead of taking the uplink on Wi-Fi, let's move the uplink over to cellular. Now, that's the simplest form. And when you do that, you actually really free up. You get 2x more range out of the Wi-Fi existing AP. You get about a 20 to 70% improvement on the downlink, and you get 10x to 50x improvement on the uplink, depending on the cellular technology you're using. So, great horsepower out of existing technology just by doing these simple things. From a control perspective, we're still using the wireless, the typical wireline access controller that's in the loop. Nothing gets changed. We do move the session, though, to be handled by the mobile core. And when you do that, what's really cool is now when you're talking about having simultaneous Wi-Fi and cellular, you can make a very quick and easy decision on moving your voice traffic, for example, on voice over Wi-Fi over to, let's say, voice over LTE, where you get to leverage the inherent spectrum advantages and how they manage those voice packets. So you can do voice over Wi-Fi, but if you have the option, just flip it over to that cellular because it's an efficient use and you don't want to overly congest and unnecessarily congest the Wi-Fi.
Yeah, so you have the flexibility to do whichever way you want. Now, before you mentioned the importance of collaborating with the different players in the industry to make sure that Wi-Fi keeps working well and the whole system doesn't get disrupted. At Alcatel-Lucent, who is that you're working with in all this in terms of partnering, in terms of getting the end-to-end solution ready?
Well, we have two major initiatives happening in parallel. One is our LTEU initiative. One is our Unified Networks initiative, and they're really separate entities. And so let me talk about the Unified Networks piece first, where we're taking Wi-Fi. We introduced a great partner, a commercial partner, Ruckus, that we'll go to market with on these Wi-Fi enhancement technologies, where we bring cellular and augment the Wi-Fi. We'll do that here in the coming up in the upcoming technologies and introduction of those technologies here very soon. What's great about that is, and then I think just makes a really important point, is that it is a Wi-Fi company who's going to their Wi-Fi deployments to say, hey, look, we can build a better wireless network for you by using the cellular. That's really the key aspect. So Ruckus is a great commercial partner for us, and we're expanding others. Accenture is another example where we're working with Accenture. ALU and Accenture have a joint go-to-market business relationship, and Accenture, of course, serves many enterprise. On the LTEU side, then we're working with all the standard players, with the standards and the Wi-Fi Alliance, and the handset providers and the silicon providers, because in unified networks, it's all pretty much leveraging what exists, and now it's about go-to-market. On the LTEU side, we're talking about new technology. We said new technology; it's the same thing, but repeated into new spectrum. New spectrum means new handsets. New spectrum means new Bs, whether they're big or small Bs, it's still new. And so we've got to spend a lot of time to make sure that silicon and and the transceivers that go into the devices are done really well and properly. So that's all new. So unified networks, existing stuff, LTEU, we're building a lot of new stuff. And so we're working with Qualcomm as a great example that we've announced partnerships with, and a lot of lead adopter operators to go and test out that technology.
Now, in terms of timeline, as you said, you need infrastructure, you need new devices. How long is it going to take to get to market?
So the LTEU, I think we'll have prototypes and proofs of concept out to operators, that I would say are commercial grade, type technologies by the end of this year. So that's in the second half of this year. So we have some in Q3, some in Q4, and then really, I think, green lighting this from an operator perspective. I see that potentially happening in first quarter 16, but there are a lot of dependencies that I don't control that we're counting on. So standards, I think deep collaboration and demonstration of the technology between the Wi-Fi community and the cellular community. It's requiring new handsets. So we have some new handsets that come out, new silicon that needs to get put into the basebands, and then rolling all of that out. So I think by the end of this year, we're going to be in a good proof of concept phase of the industry. I'll be prepared to go, but I think we have to work through through the other dependencies and make sure that everybody else is ready to go for commercial adoption.
Yeah. And when you work with very many operators, what is it you hear from them? What is the feedback you're getting?
I think when it comes, so again, the two technologies on LTEU, I think they are absolutely attracted to, in general, and I shouldn't say this in everybody, but in general, attracted to the use of unlicensed spectrum because of what that means for how much they have to pay. So they're certainly, for more spectrum. So they're certainly interested in that opportunity to augment their position, no question. They are acutely aware of the dependencies and the challenges, in particular with Wi-Fi Alliance and making sure that works well. Because really, if you're making an investment in new silicon and new handsets and new baseband and new base stations, it's really important that it's done in a way that actually has wide scale deployment capabilities. And that's why the standards are so important, and they recognize that.
Yeah. Now, in closing, what should we expect from Alcatel-Lucent in the next 2-3 years on this front?
Well, in this front, I mean, we're definitely going to participate in LTE. There's no question. But park that for a minute. We're really going to explore the segment of converting the enterprise and the home to the wireless enterprise and the wireless home. I firmly believe that we're going to move in the enterprise today from wires to the huge body of traffic on the wires in the enterprise to moving that onto the wireless network. And I think that transformation is going to happen over the next couple of years. I know we're going to have to invent a lot of new technology and services and go to market and partners in order to enable that, and we'll continue to do that. But that's the big industry shift that I see happening, and we're just going to be behind that, trying to make that big shift happen and work well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a major change and a major challenge, because that's the indoor coverage, especially in the enterprise, is still not quite there yet. Okay, Mike, well, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us. It's been great talking to you as usual.
Great talking to you. Talk to you later.
Very much. So this conversation with Mike Schabel was a part of the report on LTE and license that is available on RCR Wireless News website and on Sensafiri's website. Thanks a lot for attending.